listening to Inside the Rings, your ultimate podcast destination for everything related to the Olympic movement. Here's your host, my dad, John Hawkins.
All right, hey everybody, welcome back to Inside the Rings, a podcast that takes you inside the Olympic movement. I'm your host, John Hawkins. Today's a really special conversation with Aron McGuire, who is the CEO of the US Bobsled and Skeleton organization. Aron, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks, John. Good to be here. Looking forward to chatting with you about all things bobsled and skeleton and Olympic related topics.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate your time and for being here. So tell us a little bit about you. Share about your personal journey, how you became involved with USA Bobsled and Skeleton, and kind of what were some of those pivotal moments that led to your role as the CEO?
Sure. Like most kids, I grew up not knowing much about bobsled and skeleton. I had watched the movie Cool Runnings, certainly enjoyed that, and played a lot of sports as a young kid. Had a lot of energy, and so my parents really encouraged me to get out, run around, spend that energy, come home and eat a big dinner and go to sleep. And so I grew up playing soccer, ran track and field, was on the swim team, played volleyball. So played a lot of different sports. Not typically the mainstream sports of football, basketball, or baseball. So kind of the non primary sports within that most kids play growing up. And so that was kind of foreshadowing to getting into bobsled and skeleton. And so I ran track and field in college, and I was in high school as a pole vaulter and hurdler. And
really? That's cool.
Yeah. Yes. And so I went to the University of Akron, was a walk-on, and after my first year, the coach pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Aron, you're a hard worker. Appreciate what you do, but to be honest with you, you're not quite good enough in either pole vault or hurdles to be just a focused pole vaulter or hurdler. But we've got the right event for you, and you just have to be average, and it's the decathlon."
There you go.
Just go out, be average at 10 events, and you'll do just fine.
Yeah.
And so tried that my sophomore year, and picked up long jump, shot put, discus, javelin, added the dreaded 1,500 meter run that everybody hates, and really just fell in love with it, and kind of became a jack of all trades within track and field. Had a great experience, and that experience, my undergraduate is actually in secondary education, so I'm supposed to be a high school physics teacher in a parallel universe. I'm teaching, Einstein's theory of relativity to high school kids, but had such a great experience in college track and field. I decided I want to stay involved in sports in one way or another. And so, started to get into coaching, and I was doing some coaching at the high school level, was working with some club athletes at more of that elite level, and then doing some college coaching as well. And I was at that time living in Indianapolis, and I was still training myself. So I was still training and doing decathlon.
Oh, cool.
And this was right around the time of 2002 when the games were in Salt Lake City, Park City, and that really piqued my interest, and that really got me interested in winter sports. And so I had still been training, and I thought, I wonder if there's something I can do within winter sports. And so most people just don't say, "Oh, I'm going to be a hockey player and go at a high level." And those people don't say, "I'm going to go try this figure skating out and try and be a Olympic figure skater." But I'd known of some track and field athletes who had made that transition from track and field into the sport of bobsled. And my days of watching Cool Runnings, I remember all those guys being in the field and other sports. And so I called up the national governing body at the time and said, how does one become a bobsledder? Do you have to grow up being in Lake Placid or Park City? And they said, no, we really recruit a lot of athletes from other sports, football,
Yeah.
Track and field, soccer, softball, baseball, and they make that transition. And so I said, yeah, sign me up. This sounds really cool. And so
That's
I
awesome.
sent my numbers in track and field, my 100-meter sprint time, my long jump time, and the coach at the time, who's actually still coaching on the team, coach named Tuffy Latour, emailed me back and said, hey, we've got a rookie camp in Lake Placid at the time the Olympic Training Center, and fly out. We'll provide housing, and during that week we'll assess all the athletes who are there and teach you how the sport of bobsled works. And I said, that sounds really cool. Anytime you get any opportunity to extend that athletic career. And then, he mentioned Olympic Training Center, and I said, absolutely. So bought a flight, flew out to Lake Placid, and during that week, learned the fundamentals, the basics of the sport, how the sport works. They also tested. We had about 35 athletes who were there. They tested us in our sprints, our vertical jump, our standing long jump. And they had a bobsled on wheels that we learned how to push and get in. And so at the end of the week, they identified 3 athletes to kind of move on to the next phase. And they invited us up. At the time, it was in Calgary, Canada, where there was an indoor push track. So it was it essentially replicated the start of a bobsled or skeleton run, and all the tracks start flat and then they start to go downhill. But it was on ice, so it was like 100-yard long freezer in Calgary, and so we were pushing bobsleds in the middle of summer on ice. And really getting that feel of what it was like to push a bobsled and learning that technique. And so from that experience and from that week of training, or that actually we were up there for the summer. From that summer, I was then selected to compete on the national team and work with our World Cup athletes and go on tour. And so from there, spent the next 3 seasons competing in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, France, Austria, Canada, and the United States. And so that just was an incredible experience. While I missed making the Olympic team, I still competed at the World Championships and had just an amazing experience. And so it was awesome. that experience that then provided that opportunity to pivot and look at more of the administrative side of sports. And so from there, went and had an opportunity to work at USA Track and Field, which was based in Indianapolis, where I was living. Did that for close to 8 years, and I was coordinating all the international logistics of getting USA athletes from the United States to typically 5 or 6 major events every year, from junior world championships up to cross-country world championships, Pan Am Games, track and field world championships, and the Olympic Games. And so it went from primarily being in Europe and North America to adding Asia to my experience, and went to Beijing in 2008, and then went to South Korea and Japan. We had a few trips to Africa for world cross country events. Then went to the Middle East for a few World Cross Country Championships, and then South America and Central America. So got to really see the world, and during my time there was the team leader for the 2008 Olympic Games, and then London in 2012. And really the philosophy was, how do we create a positive, supportive, safe environment for athletes, so that way when they're traveling, and for some of our athletes, they'd never been out of the country. And this is the first time that they're traveling overseas, first time they're getting a passport. And it can be stressful. And they're on the flight, they're constantly thinking of what's it going to be like when I arrive. And so really tried to provide the best and the most comprehensive information before the event. That way the athletes knew what to expect, what the plans were. And did little things like greet every athlete at the airport with a big USA shirt on, so that way when they have that moment of anxiety and they see somebody that they may not know who they are, but they USA red, white, and blue, they're here for me. And so that reduced that anxiety and that stress to provide the opportunity, the chance for the athletes to really, really just focus on training and competition. And when you reduce that stress and remove that anxiety, the performances increase. And so, like I said, I was traveling for 7 or 8 years, sometimes half the year, 6 months on the road. And again, another really amazing experience. But after London, I decided that I needed to just settle down and travel less. And during that time, I'd taken my secondary education degree in physics and knew that I wanted to grow within leadership positions or grow within Olympic sport, Paralympic sport. And so went back to Indiana University and got my MBA. And so that provided me that knowledge, that education provided me a much better holistic view of how business works, from the finance side to the marketing, to sales, to internal operations and staffing. And so that was the educational side. And I was able to take my time with USA Track and Field and start to see real world examples. And so after London 2012, I was looking around. I spent about a year looking around for that next move. And an opportunity came up here where I'm based now, Colorado Springs, as the director of, at the time, the Olympic Training Center, now the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center. And so really took that same philosophy of how do we create a positive, supportive, safe environment for athletes, took that from traveling around the world to focused here in Colorado Springs. And was the director of the training center, and eventually also started to oversee the Lake Placid Olympic and Paralympic Training Center as well. So
that's summer,
we were in Lake Placid, and I'd spent a lot of time in Lake Placid as an athlete, so very familiar with the facilities, and spent 6 years overseeing leading those two venues, those two facilities that supported a wide range of athletes across summer and winter sports. And then about 5.5 years ago, the position of CEO of USA Bobsled and Skeleton opened up, and I thought this would be pretty cool to come full circle from an athlete back to the CEO and take the learnings and the experiences that I've had all along the way and bring them to the USA Bobsled and Skeleton.
That's awesome. That's quite the journey.
It really is. And I'll tell you, when it started, I was never thinking like that first step was never, I'm going to be a CEO of a national governing body. It was really, what's kind of in front of me. And I've always had this philosophy that there's always doors that are available to you. And it's a matter of whether you decide to take one of those doors and walk through it. Yeah. And it's also, sometimes those doors are not in your control. I mean, the CEO being, CEO position, the previous CEO had the position for 12 years. And so that door doesn't open all that often. And so it's for me, it's been about taking a look at the opportunities that are available, and then doing the things that I can to create more opportunities and more choices, create more doors. And that's one of the things that I did when I went back to get my MBA. I knew that the experience would provide future opportunities, future doors, but maybe a limited 2 or 3. And going back and getting my MBA said, okay, that I might be able to take 2 or 3 options and turn that into 5 or 6 or 7, and then eventually choose the one that was the best fit for me and the one that I was most inspired and excited about.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is awesome. So we do have one thing in common. I was also a pole vaulter.
Okay.
For one season, my sophomore year of college, and they didn't invite me back. So I was not very good. Well, but it was awesome.
Maybe you should have tried the decathlon. That could have been your path forward.
I should have.
Pole vault was. I'm always a fan of being a student of your sport or your craft or whatever it is that you're doing. And pole vaulting is one of those events that's so complex that you can never really learn enough. But that learning of that skill, of that craft, certainly translates over to being successful on the runway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I've heard you mentioned it. Others have mentioned it as well that I've had on the podcast. Sport is about the athletes, right? It's about making sure the athletes have access to training facilities mental health resources as well. But it's really about, helping athletes become the very best that they can be. And you mentioned that as well. So one of the questions I have around your role as the CEO is kind of how do you balance the administrative aspects of the role with, the ability to get the athletes to a place that they can get to with the resources that you're able to provide for them?
I think there's two parts. One is identifying what that vision is or what that goal is, and I often think about vision of what's our current state and what's our future state. Where are we today, and where do we want to be in the future? And really looking at what are the goals of the organization. And for a very long time within Olympic sport, there was really only one goal, and that was Olympic medals, and it was very narrow scope. And that produced really good success at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And saying, okay, we're gonna focus on goals or medals primarily. The challenge with that is, if you look at the number of participants that are investing time, that are investing finances, because the sports aren't inexpensive, they're extremely expensive, because at the high level you have equestrian, where you have these $1 million horses, and then you have sailing, and then not far behind are bobsled and skeleton, where there are some of the sleds cost $100,000. We spend over $125,000 a year just shipping equipment from the United States to Europe and back. So they're extremely expensive sports. And if your only metric is Olympic medals, then only 2 or 3% of the athletes are successful, meaning that now you have in their view, and if you're talking about goals of an organization, you're really setting up 97% to kind of set them up for failure. And so while that is absolutely still a priority for Team USA, while it's still a priority for USA Bobsled and Skeleton, and a priority for a majority of our athletes, one of the things that we recognize is that being involved in sport really sets you up for success in the future. And what you do and what you learn, your interactions, your experiences, and how you grow as a person can really provide that foundation for having a positive impact with your family, with your friends, within your community, and being hugely successful in your professional career. And it's something that took place, but a lot of times people don't think about it, and they don't necessarily, they're so focused on what's my technique of pushing a bobsled. How do I get from Winterberg to Altenburg, Germany? How do I, our runners, you have to sand the runners and make sure there's no scratches in the runners. And you ask an athlete, well, what did you learn? Well, I learned how to push a bobsled and compete in skeleton. But then you start to realize, no, you're learning how to be an expert at your craft, and you're learning work ethic. And when you sand a runner and you spend 2 hours sanding that runner before a big competition, that's work ethic. Competing against your competitors and not finding ways to cheat is having respect for your competitor, and getting from one part of Germany to Switzerland. That's international experience, and that's all transferable to the future. And so for us, we've really taken that narrow focus and narrow scope and broaden that, and said, okay, how can we as an organization help set you up for the future off the track? And that, you mentioned mental health, and that's providing opportunities for athletes to work through conflict resolution. That is talking about how do you create a brand for yourself. And athletes today are getting really good at that with NIL. How do I create my brand in a positive light on social media? And that translates over to how do you create that brand on a cover letter and a resume. And so these are things that we can do as an organization that doesn't just impact the 2 or 3% of our athletes, but can impact 100% of our athletes. And so for me, it's really important that as we take this journey with the athletes, how do we set them up to be able to look back at that experience in bobsled and skeleton and say, I wouldn't be the person today had it not been for bobsled and skeleton, and look back at that as no matter how they finished, whether it was just a rookie camp and going there for 1 week, or they made the national team or competed at the World Cup, World Championships, or became an Olympic medalist, they can look back at that experience and say that was a positive experience that provided me that foundational experience and skill set to be successful as I move forward there.
That's awesome. And I think you're absolutely right. Growing up, I was like you, I was involved in sport, and you learn things on the field of play, whether that's a football field, a track, a basketball court, or whatever, that you don't have the opportunity to learn elsewhere. And those skills are definitely transferable. The perseverance, the work ethic, the ability to set and keep goals. I mean, those are invaluable. So I love that focus that you have on making sure that all of the athletes, have success after their career in bobsled or skeleton. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I would agree. Yeah. And you asked me, and I said, there's two parts, and I just remembered what the second part was. How do we do it?
All right.
The second part is bringing on really good people. And so one of the things that we really take a lot of time and focus in on is making sure that we have the right staff and the right coaches that are in place to support the athletes. And for some of our coaches, Brian Scheimer, Olympic medalist, he was an athlete for over 20 years. He's been a coach for over 20 years. So he has over 40 years of knowledge and investment in the sport. And he's as passionate today as he was on day one. And so it's having people like himself that bring that sport experience. We've also balanced that out with people on our staff who have never touched a bobsled or skeleton in their life and maybe didn't know much about it. And so they're able to bring that outside experience and knowledge in to really raise our game. And so USA Bobsled and Skeleton is a smaller national governing body. We face challenges with funding and revenue. But what we do is really maximize and make sure that every dollar counts. And part of that is really having the best people involved to provide that support to the athletes to understand what the goal is, what the mission is, and that are just good people that if you find good people that have great character, great work ethic, then when you have those challenging days, when you have those days of celebration, then you're genuinely excited to work through that challenge with them or recognize that celebration and celebrate and congratulate each other and congratulate the athletes.
Oh, it's so true. So true. Being surrounded by good people is a part of everything, right, that we do. And I totally agree with you. You guys just came off your push championships. Mm-hmm. First of all, explain what push championships are. I kind of have a 3-part question. Explain what push championships are. How many athletes are involved in push championships, and then how'd they go?
Yeah, so with bobsled and skeleton, and most people are familiar with the sport of bobsled, where you have again Cool Runnings. I'd say to your listeners, if you haven't watched Cool Runnings, that's your homework for this month is to watch Cool Runnings so you have a base understanding. But in bobsled, there's 3 disciplines. There's the traditional 2-man, 2-woman, and 4-man. And then in 2022, the IOC introduced a new sport called monobob for the women. So it's monobob and 2-woman for the women and 2-man and 4-man for the men. And so monobob is just one person, and the athlete pushes the sled, gets in, and drives down the track.
By themselves.
So it's just one person. Wow. So the 3 disciplines are 1 person, 2 people, or 4 people. And then on skeleton, skeleton is an individual sport. For the most part, they've just introduced a team component. So you have in the individual sport, you're going head first down the track, same track as bobsled, at about 85 or 90 miles an hour. And then there's a team discipline where we have a male and a female athlete, and it's their combined times, and that will be contested for the first time in 2026 in Italy.
Cool.
So in both sports, you're going down a track that's a mile long. You're pulling 3 to 5 G's of force on some of those turns, and you're going 85 to 90 miles an hour. And each of the tracks are about a mile long, so they take roughly a minute to get down. And in World Cup races, it's the combined time of 2 runs. And so it's essentially a 2-mile race between the teams. And in the World Championships and Olympic Games, it's combined time of 4 runs. And so it's about a 4-mile race. And so to be successful in the sports, you really need 3 components. The first component is good equipment. So each country can build their own sleds, but they have to work. It's like auto racing, where you have specs that you have to work within, maximum and minimum. And so we're working on aerodynamics, and we're in fact in the process of building our own sleds in the United States. So that's critically important. The second piece is the next piece is pretty obvious. You need to be able to get down the track and drive down the track there's fast lines and there's slow lines. And so the pilots and the skeleton athletes need to know the fastest way to get down the track. And so they are steering as they go down. And the bobsled doesn't have an engine, the skeleton doesn't have an engine. So the start is critically important. And so the athletes themselves are the engine. And the faster you can get going at the start, the higher velocity, the more it's going to impact your downtime, and the faster you're going to go. And so the push championships for bobsled is one of the steps for us to select our World Cup team on the bobsled side. And for skeleton athletes, it's a chance for them to see where they are in comparison to each other and in comparison to where they are in the past. And so I mentioned an ice push track in Calgary. Since then, we've been fortunate that the city of Lake Placid and an organization called ORTA that maintains all the Olympic venues in Lake Placid built an ice push track in Lake Placid. And so that allows us to train on ice year round, which is phenomenal. Yeah. And so at the push championships, we'll invite all our top athletes to compete. And so we're probably talking 30 to 35 to potentially 40 push athletes on the bobsled side, and about 15 or so skeleton athletes. And so on the bobsled side, what we'll do is we'll do individual pushes on a light sled, and that starts to give us an idea of how they've been training and what their aptitude is to be successful in the sport to push a sled. And they're heavy sleds. They're 600-pound sleds, and you're pushing it from a dead stop. And each of the tracks are similar. They're a little bit different, but they all start off flat. Then they start going downhill. And so in a way, it's a bit of an extreme sprint where you're doing resistance pushing, resistance running at the start. But because we're on ice, we start to get up to our top speeds. And so now we go from resistance running to top speed running. Then the teams start going downhill. Now they're doing overspeed, all in a matter of 40 to 50 yards or meters in about 5 seconds. And then on the bobsled side, you have these 4 bobsledders that are all 200, 225 pounds going at top speed and then getting into a sled within 3/4 of a second to a second and getting their heads down. And so, the push championships allows us to test athletes to see, how they're doing relative to each other. Then eventually what we'll do is from the results of the individual pushes, but then we'll also do combination pushes where we'll have, on the women's side, the pilot and the push athlete pushing together for 2 women. And then at times what we'll do is we'll have 3 push athletes, a brakeman who pushes from the back, and then 2 side pushers, and then they'll push together. And so we'll utilize those times to ultimately select the World Cup team that travels throughout Europe and in North America. And so how'd they go? They went really well. The great news is there's been a lot of good success from Paris. People are excited about the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. Obviously, a really exciting announcement with Salt Lake City and Park City hosting the games in 2034, and so that helped raise awareness. And so, I'd like to capitalize on Olympics in the press to let athletes know that bobsled and skeleton are ways that they can continue on that athletic career and potentially make an Olympic team. And so we had a really good mix of veteran athletes who have been part of the sport for year or years coming back, and then we had a good mix of rookies that put down some pretty fast times. And so that's where we're always trying to put together that mix of veterans and rookies, because we have to. The veterans know the sport. They've been successful in the sport, but we also have to be thinking about 2030 and 2034 as well. So we constantly have to be bringing in new athletes who then become bobsled push athletes, potentially pilots, and then on the skeleton side as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You mentioned you didn't grow up pushing a bobsled, right? How do most athletes get involved in bobsled or skeleton?
Well, I think they're sports that, believe it or not, they're sports that most of us can relate to and have a little bit of experience. And you say, well, very few people have been down a track, but most everybody, unless you live in Texas or Florida, have and never traveled north, have been down in the wintertime a sledding hill and just lay down on your stomach, or got in with a couple of friends and went down a sledding hill, and you can feel that excitement of the wind and the snow hitting your face and kind of the thrill. And a lot of times you probably did the same thing, built jumps and you jump and wipe out.
Yeah. I was just thinking that.
So that is an experience that most Americans have had. And bobsled and skeleton is extreme sled riding. And instead of going down your local hill, you're going down a mile-long track at 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so when the idea of trying it out comes up for some of these athletes, they're like, oh, yeah, I remember that as a kid. Get a little nostalgic of being a kid and say, I want to have that same experience, but even at a higher level. And so most of our athletes, unless they've grown up in Park City or Lake Placid, most of our athletes have never touched a bobsled or a skeleton sled until their early 20s. And so a majority of our athletes played a collegiate sport. Again, football, track and field, softball, rugby, and maybe haven't gotten to they may not be able to have that next chance of making a national track and field team or going to the NFL. But they're like, I'm still in great shape. I'm still hungry to do more. Yeah. And so that's where we have a lot of talent transfer, where athletes will come out and try it out. And so when they try it out, there's really two boxes they need to check. One, do they have that athletic physical aptitude? And there is kind of a range that we're looking for in terms of age, size, speed. And I always say if you're a big person that can run fast and push heavy objects, then you might be a bobsled or skeleton athlete. The other aspect is that you have to actually enjoy the sport. And that's not true of everybody. And when you take that first run and you go down the track, there's two reactions. One reaction is how do I get back to the top of the track as quickly as possible to do it again? And the other reaction is how do I get to the airport as quickly as possible to go home and never do this again?
Sure.
And so fortunately, most of the athletes that do it they know what they're getting themselves into, and they have a complete blast. And they say, "This is cool. I want to keep doing this." And they're in the sport, but we do have some rookie camps and some early sliding school where someone's roommate will not be there in the morning, and they've packed up their gear, they packed up their clothes, and they've departed in the middle of the night, and they said, "Nope, this isn't for me," and that's fair. And so, at the end of the day, if the athlete is checking both boxes, I've got the physical aptitude, and this is these are awesome sports. I love going down the track fast. Then we have our future bobsled and skeleton athletes.
That's awesome. How young do you recruit athletes?
There are the Youth Olympic Games. So bobsled is part of the Youth Olympic Games. And so we do have some athletes that are as young as 16 years old in the sport.
Got it.
16, 17, 18. Most of our athletes that we recruit are in their early 20s because they're finishing up their college degree. We do have some that come right out of high school and that are 18 years old.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're really trying to do, especially in Park City and in Salt Lake City, I mean, there's a great population, a large population in Salt Lake City, not too far from the track. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, and we're thinking about 30 and 34, is get some high school athletes and get them out to the track once a week or twice a week just to have fun and experience the sport. And throughout their high school career and perhaps they stay in the area or they have time off in the wintertime in college, they're coming out and they're taking trips. And that way, when they have that opportunity, that chance to focus on the sport full time, they've already got 100 runs. They've already got 200 runs in their back pocket that they can now apply, because it does take in skeleton and being a bobsled pilot, it takes 4 or 6 years to really get good. As a bobsled push athlete, you can be good in a year or two, and you can make a World Cup team, or you can even make an Olympic team in a couple of years. But if you want to be a pilot or a skeleton athlete, it does take it's a longer time investment. And so if we can start introducing that sport to 15, 16, 17-year-olds early on, and whether it's limited runs, but those are important runs that they can start getting. So we are recruiting regionally a bit younger in Utah, but nationally it's typically 18, 19 or 20 or 20, 22, 23 years old.
Okay. Just to kind of as they're finishing their collegiate experience. That's cool.
Yes.
That's awesome. Maybe just a couple more questions. I appreciate the time you've been able to spend with us. Talk to me about kind of, you mentioned your vision for the future and really kind of centered around the athletes. It kind of expound on that more. What do you see as the future of USA bobsled and skeleton, and what are you doing now to kind of achieve those goals? 5-10 years down the road.
So, being successful on the track is important to us, and we talked about the importance of providing that off-track experience and that holistic experience. That's absolutely important. Being successful at the games is very important to us as well. And fortunately, we've had success since 2002. USA Bobsled and Skeleton have won medals at every Olympic Games, and so that's an important legacy, and it's an important history that we need to continue moving forward. And so, raising awareness and engaging athletes. One of the things that we know that we're never going to be a USA Volleyball with 400,000 members. We know we're never going to be a USA Swimming or Triathlon. We've got 2 tracks in the United States. We're fortunate to have 2 tracks, but that means limited time on the ice. And if you think about bobsled, skeleton, and luge, who is a separate national governing body, but we use the same facilities. If you were to relate that to hockey, figure skating, and curling, but saying instead of hundreds or thousands of ice sheets across the United States, we're going to limit you to 2 ice sheets. That's going to have an impact on how many people can participate. And so we do recognize that we're not going to necessarily be a massive membership organization, but we do know that quality of athlete and quality of people coming into the sport is really important to us. And so raising awareness to identify more fans that know about the athletes, who get to know about them, who learn about the sports and have an appreciation for the sport is really important. But also raising that awareness to bring those new athletes into the sport, so that way we have a constant pipeline of athletes that we can look at 26, we can look at 30, we can look at 34 and beyond by bringing those athletes in. The other thing that's really important to us is that we're able to financially support the athletes as best we can. And so we are challenged financially. Most national governing bodies, and I'm sure I know you've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again because people can't hear it enough. Even though we wear uniforms and shirts that say USA and are red, white, and blue, we are not federally funded. So we don't get any funding from taxes. And every other competitive Olympic team in the world is federally funded or government funded, or they get funding from their lotteries. And so we have to be extremely smart about how we invest our money. But that means that we can't outspend the competition. So we have to outthink them, and we have to really build strong partnerships and raise the most amount of money that we possibly can. And so most national governing bodies raise funds in 5 ways. Membership, which we've already talked about. We're never going to be a large membership organization. So we don't have that revenue source. Other thing is events. We don't host events. We don't have grassroots or masters programs. And a lot of sports raise funds by hosting youth events, by hosting grassroots events, by hosting masters events. And so we have limited revenue from those 2 sources, membership and events. And so we're really limited in 3 sources. Our largest revenue source is through the USOPC. So we're extremely fortunate to have that funding through the USOPC because, again, they recognize...
Which also is not...
Which is also, yes. Team USA, USOPC is not government funded either. So there's no government funding flowing into Olympic sport or Paralympic sport or going to USA athletes. We are fortunate. We'll recognize the state of Utah and New York City, or New York, state of New York, about their commitment to maintain the facilities in both Salt Lake City and Park City as well as Lake Placid. Because winter sport, that's extremely important, and we're not able to support the goals of our athletes in winter sport without those 2 things. So those two states. Right. So we're incredibly important to have the support of the states in those 2 areas. So we rely on the USOPC. The next one is sponsorships, and so we do have some really important sponsors that do fund us financially, but then a lot of our partners are emotionally invested in in USA athletes as well, and so some of our partners are providing resources, whether it's their expertise or it's value in kind. So it could be products as well that support the
cool.
And so, and then the last piece is foundation, individual donors, and so people that are willing to write a check. Individuals or corporations that are really willing to write a check to help support the USA athletes. And so it is USOPC, it's sponsorship, and it's donations. So when I competed, we have a number of quota spots that we can send on tour, and a lot of times typically it's been 3, and we can send up to 4 skeleton athletes per discipline. When I competed, USA 1, 2, and 3 were all funded. And so, as athletes, we had to pay for our apartment, pay for our gym membership, pay for our travel in the off season. Once you were named to that national team or World Cup team, all your travel was covered. Your housing was covered. Your equipment was provided. Shipping for equipment back and forth was provided. Unfortunately, we're at a point where we're not there anymore. And so while revenue has steadily increased over time, inflation has outpaced revenue. Yeah. And so the cost of participating in the sport, the cost of competing at a high level have gone up significantly. And so we're always racing against inflation and costs with especially sponsorship and donations. And so we're unfortunately at a point right now where we're not able to fully fund our USA 1, 2, and 3 teams, or on the skeleton side, our 4th athlete. And so think about it. Our top team, USA 1, is fully funded for the most part, typically. USA 2 is mostly funded, but those athletes still have to self-fund part of their season. And USA 3 is primarily self-funded by the athletes. And so that way, that means that they're paying for some of their flights. They're paying for some of their shipping of their equipment. They're paying for some of their housing, and it's not funded completely by the national governing body. And so one of our visions, it isn't cheap. And if you think about it, if you relate it to, say, the women's World Cup soccer team, like you would never get to a point where you go to the women's World Cup soccer team or the men's and say, okay, we got some good news and bad news for you all. Good news is we're going to pay for the forwards and the goalie. We're going to buy your flights and hotels to compete at the World Cup or the Olympic Games, but the midfielders and defenders, you got to buy your own flights and buy your own food and pay for half your hotel. Like, we would never be at that point. And so we need to get to a point as a country that we're fully funding our athletes. And so that's, as I talk about the vision of where we are today and where we need to get as an organization moving forward. And I would say that's not unique to us as bobsled and skeleton. Unfortunately, that's more common than we think across Olympic and Paralympic sport, where athletes they're starting to shoulder more and more of the burden of the costs of participation. And so where I'm committed to getting us to is to a point where we are able to get back to a point where we are fully funding our World Cup team, and we're providing them the necessary resources and support to dedicate their time to the sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to end it on a fun thing. Not that this whole thing hasn't been fun, but tell me about your favorite memory in bobsled.
There are a lot of favorite memories, and
okay.
I think one of my favorite memories, and I look back at it now, and I remember just being excited about trying the sport out. Yeah. And I remember not really knowing what I was getting myself into, but saying, this sounds cool. I want to do this.
Yeah.
And thinking about going out to the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid. And I thought to myself, worst case scenario, I go to Olympic Training Center and I have a cool experience there and it's fun. I can go home and tell the story about trying out for the bobsled team. And best case scenario, it's potentially making a national team and competing and getting that chance to wear a red, white, and blue, competitive suit and jacket that says USA. And so when you go to Lake Placid, typically you fly into Albany, New York, and it's about a 2-hour drive to Lake Placid. And it's a beautiful drive, and you're going through the mountains and you're going past these lakes. And we're sitting in the van that was taking us out there. And there were a few, I'd say, physically intimidating athletes who were in the van with me, and thinking to myself, what the heck did I get myself into? Like, I'm going to just go up and get blasted, get smoked out here. But I remember just going along the road and this beautiful lake off to the left-hand side and these mountains off to the right-hand side, and thinking, I'm going to make the most of this experience. No matter what happens, I'm going to give it my all. I'm just going to invest everything I can into this moment. And looking back at it, I remember feeling that anxiety and thinking about what did I get myself into? And then now realizing I made the national team. I competed around the world, competed at the World Championships. And so every time I go up to Lake Placid, I drive past this one spot and I think to myself, man, 20 years ago, I remember being in the van and having this experience and thinking about what did I get myself into? And now looking back, being in the CEO role, being surrounded by amazing coaches, amazing staff, amazing athletes, and saying we're building something amazing and big, and we're being part of the Olympic Games and being part of hopefully at some point the Paralympic Games is something that's bigger and has a global impact than any one of us individually. And so I'd say that moment plus every time I go down that road is one of my favorite memories of being involved in the sport and continuing to be involved with bobsled and skeleton.
Awesome. Aron, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for the time and for your efforts in USA Bobsled and skeleton. I think, I've been a fan for a long time and so appreciate all you're doing and we want to follow you during the World Cup season coming up and then obviously next year in Milan Cortina as well. So keep up the great work and feel free to come back. We'd love to have you back on the podcast at a future date. So
good. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing. Winter sports and Olympic sports, sometimes Paralympic sports can fly under the radar. And so we've got an amazing opportunity coming up in 34 and a lot of opportunities along the way to raise awareness of the sports, the athletes, and the impact of what we're collectively doing on a global scale. And so, helping tell those stories and get the word out is tremendous. So appreciate all that you're doing and the efforts, and looking forward to being on this journey with you as we go into 26, into 30, and 34 and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. So awesome. Aron, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Rings. We encourage you to rate and share the podcast. And if there is any topic you would like us to cover, leave us a comment. See you next time.